So,
Good morning.
ladies and germs, I have a very special guest to do this interview right now. We have one of the signatories for the document themselves on the channel. One of our local TOs, actually, Nilly Boy. Nilly Boy, thank you for so much for being on. How you doing today?
Awesome. I'm doing pretty good. I'm very flattered that you would call me a special guest because I feel like I'm very much the opposite of that. Um, so we could talk a little bit more about what I mean here in a second. But yeah, so I'm the assistant coach to Devon here, who is the head coach for the Eastern Oregon University Esports program. A big part of our program is centered around combining um, our Eastern Oregon, FGC with the college university and giving college students an opportunity to compete in FGC events here in the Pacific Northwest. So very excited to be here and to talk about this. Obviously, it's gotten a lot of attention here in the past, day or two. So we're looking forward to answering some questions if you guys have.
Why, thank you, sir. We appreciate having you. I took some notes that I briefly discussed when you weren't here, but let me just get a couple of examples. Okay, so I watched the video to video earlier today of a gentleman who was watching this video who I'm not gonna lie, after hearing him talk, I definitely threw out some negative words. I might have called him a neckbeard
Well,
and threw a
I
couple
don't
of.
want to and I'm I should start by specifying again. So I'm a signatory on this Eastern Oregon University, our esports program, and so Eastern Oregon's FGC is signed on to this code of conduct. Um, I'm not necessarily a part of any of the committees. I've sat in on some of the meetings as far back as during the summer as the groundwork was being laid. I'm not super involved in all of this, but I am very supportive of this project. Just so to get that out front, that everybody knows you know um, where my credentials are as far as that goes. Um, I don't want the conversation to break down into a perpetual series of name calling and negatives and things like that. I think that this concept is only going to be divisive if we really let it be. So, but I understand. Yeah, there's some interesting takes out there. We'll be yeah.
Yeah, no, it's gonna be either this unites us or breaks us, and hopefully unites. But I think
Well, and what's been, obvious, or what's been obviously great to see is that, yeah, there's been some, not super productive criticisms, but there has been in, such a greater extent, a lot of positive, ideas that have come out, and that's really reassuring to see, as long as people are engaging in good faith conversation, um, we can only be happy with that. So,
right. So I have a couple of nuances that I want to get your opinion on in the conduct section. Right, section 3, we're going to talk about some violations.
okay.
Um, so 3.15. Taking photographs or recording of another person without their consent or backer authorization. So what does this mean for people taking taking photos that they put on their portfolio, or people who see a hype match and record the match so that way they can study it later, or just like, hey, I was cool for this really cool event. I was there for this really cool moment that wasn't on stream, and I felt like people should see it. Like, what does it mean
I
for those
think
instances?
I think that essentially what they're, looking at when they're talking about this, and again, I want to specify that um, my involvement in them creating this has been, very minimal. Again, I'm just pretty supportive of, this idea and this concept. Um, and so I don't want to muddy the waters by trying to interpret things that I'm not super sure about with their intent. But my understanding of this would be that what they're essentially saying is that if you're going to be at an event, what this code of conduct covers is that an event will probably need you as a condition of participating in that event, meaning that you are giving permission for representatives of the event to film it and to get pictures and stuff like that, which is pretty standard, right? I know there are countries where the photographing of minors is different, and that they have more strict rules about that in order to protect the identities of minors and things like that. But generally speaking, it's if you're going to be in an event, the organizers of that event need to make sure that everyone who's there understands that they may be, um, involved in that. They may have, video taken of the event. That may mean that you're in there, or pictures taken. You might be in those pictures. It's essentially something that it's the onus isn't, I think, on the person there who's taking pictures as much as it is on the organizers to make sure that all the participants there understand and are okay with that. So.
And what does that mean for? Okay, so say that in a time where someone's trying to promote a safe space, like they see something happening, but there's not anyone else around to witness it, so they take a recording as like evidence, like photographic proof that says, hey, this thing happened, and it needs to be investigated. However, there is then a photographic record or recording that is being taken without another person's consent, possibly the perpetrator and the victim.
So again, we're getting into things that are a little bit outside of the scope of what I'm familiar with as far as the intent of the people who've been working on these committees and stuff. If this is something that's at an event, again, the understanding is that by signing up, especially at larger events, there's the understanding that you might be recorded and things like that.
Well, it could be an event, but one of the things that is addressed in the location guidelines is venue areas, hotel rooms, private homes, bars, clubs, social media, public chat platforms, and
right. That essentially we have to, make sure that that we can help. I see what you're saying with that, but again, I have had not as much of a hands-on role in the development of these the specifics, I guess, you know what I mean.
Oh, that's fine. Just what does your interpretation mean? It might not be, because again, we acknowledged that beforehand earlier on when we were talking about the documentation and its definitions, that it does say it's a working document and things will be taken by a case-by-case perspective. But let's just get some an idea of like what your immediate thoughts would be if you had to investigate this case, like.
I guess the question would go down to if that person recording that incident, are they themselves violating any state or local or federal national ordinances regarding that recording? That would obviously affect whether or not they're okay to do that, and that would be, I think, the number one concern with that, because at the end of the day, we don't want to use. Nobody wants to use evidence that in itself, was acquired in, amoral means,
Even with proper intent. I mean, this is the great part about law in general, because I think in Oregon and California, you cannot take a recording of somebody while informing them beforehand and having their consent.
Mm-hmm.
But
meanwhile,
I
you
don't
have
know
states
if
like
there's
New York that I think only one party needs to be aware of that, or something like that. You know what I mean? And again, and so it is very much going to vary.
And I don't know if that's something like Ultra David could answer. He probably could because he's the lawyer. But I know that I don't know if there's a statute in those states that provides the except in the in recording of a crime, right? Of creating evidence of a crime.
I would like to circle back though. So reiterating that I am very much new to the FGC. Brand new TO to a brand new region that is, building itself up here and has been for the past year or so. The example that you're providing here, me not being able to provide you with an answer, because I don't know, it kind of shows that here's a situation where in order to effectively help regulate my scene, say this incident were to happen at one of our events, or it were to happen,
in my house, let's just say
regarding
that
one of our players or something like that,
Yeah.
I need help with this. It's the kind of thing where if there's no kind of greater support system in doing the research on this, in doing that kind of investigative work, I'm on my own, and I as a TO may decide, already being someone who's doing this on their own time and not getting reimbursed for any of the time that's going into the running of this region anyway. Now I have to do all this extra work, need to know all these different things. There might be a temptation to avoid. Now as a TO, if I have access to a community who is really taking a look at answering these hard questions, it's a lot easier for me to more confidently get the help that I need in addressing the problem and seeing it addressed in the right way. So it's the kind of thing where it's a way for TOs to not feel like they're drowning in the very complicated nuances that revolve around the FGC and conduct.
Right. All right. So let me get to some of these chat questions for a second here. Actually, not a whole lot of questions. Just a lot of solid ideas. But so let me ask you this. Recently, I feel like with the advent of social media, the idea of cancel culture has run rampant and prevalent. There are definitely instances where, yes, we need to cancel people, but at the same time, we have to acknowledge there's a flip side of that coin that says we are going to write someone off as opposed to give them an opportunity to acknowledge that they have made mistakes and work towards something better. Oh, do you feel like this code of conduct promotes cancel culture? I mean, especially if we properly implement the tools and like record keeping events, right? Like saying like, oh, this person said hard R at this event, or made like transfer remarks at this event to this player, or just like in Discord was making misogynistic remarks. Like, do you feel like it's going to promote the sense of cancel culture and thus alienate people from the scene and cause them to have moments where they're like, well, I had this thing I really loved, but then like the feminist took it away from me, you know what I mean? And then instead of saying like, hey, let me reflect on that, acknowledge the things that I did that I'm like, yeah, okay, that wasn't okay, they'll instead retreat to communities that accept them the way they are and then provide them that support that you just took away.
Well, one big concern I can only assume would be that if this is rolled out and there are different communities that have concerns about it, that those could be communities in which that stuff is allowed to kind of flourish, if that makes sense. It's like, oh well, this is a scene that isn't going to implement these kinds of standards and things like that. I'm not as worried about the idea of people being. I think we're seeing that like that idea is super rampant in the discourse recently. I think that it's the kind of thing where how you rehabilitate someone, how someone becomes rehabilitated, I guess, it very much depends on what they did, depends on the person, it depends on the people who were hurt or affected by that as well, because the intent of this code of conduct is to make sure that a safe environment is fostered. And so there's a number of different ways that you could look at it. You could use the tools in record keeping, obviously, to keep track of people who have done something wrong in the past. And I think you would not want to have some kind of uniform, like, this is the rehabilitation process for this kind of offense or that or whatever. It could come down to the people who were affected by that. If you for example, were the victim of harassment, one big concern is that this code of conduct wants to make sure that people who have the potential to be repeat offenders aren't allowed to continue to do that. Maybe it's something that if you feel like that person has changed and that the person who was affected you negatively, if they've changed, then maybe you could be the person who says, okay, well, let's give them a chance. If you have a communication process between the people running this code of conduct and the victims of different violations, maybe that could be the way that you go about dealing with this stuff. At the end of the day, though, I think that the idea of cancel culture is a little oversaturated and over emphasized.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna point out another like just in example of violations. I mean, this one's real. This is minor, but it's something that I just kind of want to see which way this would be interpreted. All right, let's take a look at 3.1.7. Intentionally outing any other person's sexual orientation, gender, or other identities without their consent. Here's my example I mentioned earlier. Let's say I have a tournament and SonicFox comes. Right, and let's say someone hasn't really been keeping up on SonicFox Twitter, and so they mistakenly refer to them as he. And me, being an enlightened individual, is like, well, actually, they use non-binary pronouns. That doesn't count as, or does that count as? Because I am intentionally outing another person's gender, so that way they are addressed correctly.
I think,
and that's why I added in my when I spoke about it earlier. I thought that the caveat with intention to harm needed to be added. Or something along those lines, because there are instances like that where like you want people to be addressed correctly because that provides the inclusion piece, right?
Right. I think that is definitely a good point that you could, bring that up. But I think that leaving it vague like that, I think that there might be people who are looking to kind of, bend, kind of these, potential situations to the extreme in order to poke holes, and I think the amount of mental gymnastics that it's taking is pretty extreme in some cases. A situation like this, if you have a person who accidentally misgenders someone, they didn't necessarily do it, intentionally, and that can be reflected by the way in which they respond to being called out, for it. You trying to correct that person is, an important, part of, trans acceptance, right? And them having an open mind to receiving that feedback, it's a huge part of them growing too, right? And it's a sign if they were to respond negatively to that, and to not want to, use that as a learning point, that's when there's some issues with like, intention. And so if you have two people like that in that scenario, there wasn't really necessarily any malice on either end. I think that it would be a stretch to, have that be a violation. But you also have to take into account, if, say SonicFox is the example of that, how that person responds to the incident as well, if they're like, witnessing it, if they're there for it,
Yeah.
So because they should have a say to, like, a good example would be a lot of people are talking about what does the accepted level of trash talk mean. Way past like varying on region or on scene, that comes down to the individual, right? And so the only person who can say you went too far is the person who was there. So me, I'm not super comfortable actually trash talking, right? Like, you've tried to get me to do it before,
It doesn't
and
work.
I'm just bad at it, But say I did go a little too far, Now, if you were, violating, things like, if I'm using discriminatory language and things like that, that goes beyond trash talk, right? And so that's covered in, 3.1, 0.6. But, to say I say something that, gets under your skin, and if you tell me, hey man, okay, you went a little too far, knock it off. If I'm a reasonable person, which most of us are, I'm going to respond to that. I'm going to say, okay, sorry, I'll knock it off. Okay, cool. Two individuals just resolve that problem.
Right.
If the person said, if I, keep going after you ask me to stop, that's when it's a problem. And the whole idea of this, governing body would be, now that you have been, the victim of, somebody breaking this code of conduct, you can go to the local TO for that event. And they have the opportunity to solve it on their own, or go to this body if they don't feel comfortable solving it on their own, or say that TO didn't help you at all, or you felt that they didn't, resolve it properly, or whatever. Now, you as a player have another, because if it was just a conglomerate of different organizations, different scenes running their own thing, you go to the TO, they don't do anything about it, that's the end of it, nothing happens. But now you have a governing body that you can go to and say, hey, listen, I tried to resolve it here. It didn't happen here. Now I have another group of people that I can go to who can help me. So it's the kind of thing where I really think we need to look at it as a toolkit for TOs and players alike in order to, go through and resolve these conflicts.
So that brings that actually prompts an interesting question. So, what happens in the event that a tournament says, "Okay, we're gonna follow the fighting game code of conduct," puts it in a list, but then doesn't actually adhere to the code of conduct, right? Like, say, someone reports a participant for using discriminatory language. It makes it all the way up to the governing board. They give a ruling, and then the TO of that event doesn't enforce the disciplinary action.
That is a good question. That would be something that all of a sudden now the governing body has to look at this scene, and they have to take a look at just how serious the signatory, whoever is in charge of that region or that event or whatever, they have to take a look obviously at how serious they are in being a part of this. I'm going to call it a contract, I guess. This set of standards, and that might get to a point then where now, okay, well, if this scene's organizers are not doing anything about handling conduct violations, well, now the governing body needs to cut ties with them, and that could lead to things like boycotts or whatever needs to be done in order to have a scene recognize that you got to hold people accountable. And tournament organizers should really want to do this, and I think a lot of the times they do. It's just that is a very difficult thing to tackle on your own. And so I would again reiterate that having a group of trusted and experienced TOs behind you, backing you up and helping you, is only going to be a benefit for scenes. I think it's only going to help embolden the people who have kind of risen to those leadership positions as TOs in different regions.
Alrighty. One thing I did question earlier, and I want to kind of gauge what your thought process is. I was looking through some of the Twitter responses, and one of them that caught my attention was somebody was like, "Oh, it doesn't mean like much if the big names don't sign on to it, like the Cannon Brothers, Evo, Jabali, CEO, Rick Hado, a combo breaker," and I felt that person was dumb. I'll be honest. I did not maintain a good job of being objective when I was looking at Twitter comments, because I was like, y'all are stupid. Okay? I had hard feelings about that. I was not objective about it. But I think let me gauge what your thought process is.
So I wouldn't call that person. Okay, go ahead.
So one of the things that I took acknowledgement to immediately when I read the document was the second sentence of the preamble. And the end of the second sentence says, to create a safer and more inclusive FGC in which more people can enjoy the fun, exciting, grassroots spirit of our community. And I feel like that is going to be the answer. So what I took issue with when I read that comment was it subscribes to the idea of trickle-down economics, right? Like, things work from the top down, as opposed to, this is an FGC community. Like, we always talk about how we're a grassroots spirit. Like, we threw tournaments in our basement. We didn't need corporate sponsorship. Now we're at the point where we get those things, right? So it seems like people are regressing to, like, okay, now that we have that, we make it from the top down as opposed to bottom up, right? I feel like, because I used the term propagation of effectiveness, right? If every scene, like if all the grassroots scenes don't adhere to the guidelines or the conduct, then it can't propagate its way up to the top, right? Like, you don't build a pyramid from the top down or a skyscraper from the top down. You go from the bottom up. You build a strong foundation. And then as those things become prevalent on the home turf, you bring home to those larger events, right? Where it's like, yeah, CEO might adopt it because they're like, oh wow, so many like locals are already used to this rule set. like this conduct that like yeah, it's safe for me to bring it here because then I'm not alienating people to my experience. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
So I
Yeah,
think
it's
that's where I'm at
the
with
kind
it.
of thing where like we as a larger community shouldn't like need to wait to get the go ahead to hold ourselves to a higher standard from the big names. We should be pretty motivated, I think, to do that on our own. If you're kind of like waiting for that seal of approval from big names, I think it's going to happen, first of all. And again, I don't want to call that person who is arguing that, you need some weight behind this. I think that that's a valid argument for sure. But again, it's the kind of thing where we shouldn't sit around and what this whole great area what this fighting game code of conduct represents is the work of TOs from all over right now, largely from the US, but also from the EU, from Latin America as well. It represents that idea of grassroots TOs who don't want to sit around and wait for somebody else to come in and be the ones to help get the ball rolling. We should start from the ground up, and the tournaments that get really big should get big because they have a reputation not only of putting on great events, but also of again holding themselves and everyone to a higher standard. So and that definitely should come from the bottom up. But again, I wouldn't criticize someone for wanting to see those big names get in behind it too. So
I think you are a much kinder person than I am. Because I'm going to be honest, I lampooned into him, man. I was like, you idiot. You don't understand how these things work. I mean,
well, and
I was
again, it's
not a
the kind of
productive
thing
adult.
at the end of the day, if if they're coming into a conversation like that positively, if they have ideas, they want to make them known, we got to listen. If people are coming in and having bad faith arguments and trolling and things like that, then that's one thing. But any kind of criticism, I think, should definitely be looked at, because this isn't just the idea of the number one concern that I've seen, that I think is very interesting, is that who are these people, and why did they just get to decide all this and that. um, it's interesting though that like you simultaneously are seeing these are a group of nobodies. I don't recognize any of these names. But then you'll also see, like at the same time, or like even in the same breath, like, oh, but this is like some elite cabal of like TOs who are deciding all this for us. Well, it's like, are they a group of nobodies, or are they like a group of like shadowy elites? I think that's very overblown. Um, you know, People don't recognize my name on that list of signatories because I've been playing fighting games for 2 years. I'm just a person who is starting up a scene, is very active in seeing that scene grow and be part of something bigger. And I'm a person who's just very interested in taking, whatever, talents, or, if we're being honest, it's mainly my free time and my availability to trying to help grow something. And so that's open for everybody. It's not like this, shadowy thing. And if it's going to be a grassroots thing, there are going to be a lot of people that you don't know. And this is going to be a great way for that interconnectivity to really start to take hold. So,
I think what we're seeing is, and to support your statement, like, yeah, we're seeing a lot of double-edged statements. Actually, Deskcrew in the chat pointed out a very obvious thing. And again, if you're in the chat, feel free to type questions, comments, whatever. I'll work them in if I feel like they contribute to the conversation and not detract from it. But it was interesting that they pointed out that it's hard. I do find it hard to believe that people meet a big name supporter for something that should support basic human decency and won't believe in it otherwise. Or to continue, only hard to believe because it seems weird that you can say I need more important people behind this, and at the same time say I agree with this. What I agree with what this delivers for basic human decency.
mm-hmm.
So that
um, and yeah, criticisms about specific passages being too vague or too specific, things like that are things that this group has to take into account. Um, and I think that they are for sure. But it's the kind of thing where people are talking about it. The idea of it being a power grab is, I think, very misplaced, because if you look at the intent of a lot of the vague language, that vague language is there as a way, and I think you talked about this a little bit earlier, of keeping, as a way of not taking away options for local TOs. it's the kind of thing where for different TOs you will have some leeway to work with here on things that are naturally very vague, and very specific, as a lot of these violations will end up being. Um, but then you as a player again also have the opportunity, if you don't think that a TO is working within those bounds fairly or properly, now you have somewhere that you can go in order to get a second set of eyes on this as well. And this isn't like some shadowy cabal of elites. These are tournament organizers who are coming home from their 9 to 5 jobs, or even longer, obviously, and they're choosing to take their free time to work on a project, on a grassroots project, that really hopefully again brings everybody together with an interconnected set of standards and goals to aspire towards. And yeah, that one of those goals being everybody feels safer and feels like they have ways of having their concerns, or things like that addressed.
I have one other question. It's back to another. It's not. It's back to another kind of nitpicky thing, where of a very specific instance. Um, I thought it was very interesting. Let me see. Okay, going back to location. So 2.2.2
Now
under
you're talking.
the objectives section.
Mhm.
So I really do like the location segment. I think it's very important. I kind of did explain. Oh, I hold on. For Melody 69 or 96. Oh my goodness. Dyslexic moment. Give me a second. I have to recover mentally. I am speaking to Neely Boy, who is one of the signatories for this document, for the FGCoC, which I think is linked here in the chat. So if you want to follow along and see which points I'm talking about, I got you. If you have any questions, feel free to put those in the chat, and we'll definitely put them up in the interview. So, let me ask you about. So in locations, I did like the inclusion of venue areas, hotel rooms, private homes, bars and clubs, social media, and stuff like that, because those are the places where events can be ran. Like one of the things I want to do after COVID, I was mentioning, is I want to bring back Tekken Tuesday, but I want to host it here in my house and have a bunch of loud, angry, like fighting games players having a good time, being hype, right?
Mhm.
But that's a competition space, so that these rules need to be acknowledged in competition spaces. The last sentence is where I thought things got really interesting on a technical level. However, due to potential privacy concerns, the COC team will not accept and will not make any decisions based on any private communications like text messages or direct messages. And why this kind of concerns me is, say we have a situation where when they're at the event, they just act perfectly fine, right? Like, say
Mhm.
two people are acting just fine, but say that behind the scenes there's a power dynamic, right? Where it's like you don't know because they don't act like, but like you could, one person exerts control over the other. It's like, hey, by the way, if you like beat me in this tournament today, I'm not you're not getting a ride home, or like things that only take place over text message, and that
Mhm.
is the only definitive proof that we have to provide to support allegations. So, is that not allowed to come into evidence then at that point? If they're saying, hey, uh, I can't think of it. I think this happened with Captain Zach, but I'm not going to mention that example because I'm not 100% at this time that is the exact situation that happened. But just like, this person acts just fine with their tournament, but I feel vehemently uncomfortable because of the things they message me, like while we're at the event, or like when we're not at the event. And here are
So
those things.
my assumption of this, so here's an instance where we've gone from, if you take a look at uh, where do we got here, 3.1.2, the trash talking one. Here is a line that is left obviously pretty vague. um, and I would argue that that is for a specific reason. I would assume then that if you take this very specific set of media, and if the code of conduct team is uh, laying it out right here that for these specific, forms of communication, that we can accept and make decisions on these, that is probably, and they say, due to potential privacy concerns, that, that is probably a space in which they, being, a non, legal entity, they're not police, they're not, prosecutors of any kind, they're not, legally allowed to, breach people's privacy. What they're probably doing here is trying to hold people to the highest standard possible, both in venue and outside of, venue. But there are some places, obviously, that, a committee like this, there's some lines that they can't cross. And everybody has rights, and among those is, rights to privacy. And so this is probably them saying, and yeah, it's unfortunate because there might be instances where, someone might be the victim of something like that. But, the COC team is not, unfortunately, the people who can be, in charge of dealing with that. What that might mean then is that if there is online targeted harassment going on, the real authorities may need to get involved. And if there are legal consequences for those actions, then the COC can look at that. And, if, legal decisions have been made, then, a violation, can be proven to have occurred, I guess. So if they're being specific, I would argue that the legal team behind this is, probably done that for a reason. They're understanding what their limitations are as an organization, as a community of TOs, trying to keep people safe, and so I don't want to keep rambling about it, but yeah. And just to reiterate again, am I a lawyer? Absolutely not. Am I on the legal team that, helps put a lot of this stuff together? No. So I don't want to put words into the mouths of the people who have spent, almost a year working on this. I just, I'm trying to do the best that I can to, examine, and interpret, what their intent was.
Okay, I have. Let's close this out by I'm going to make a statement that says I am in favor of the code of conduct. Let me state that so that is open knowledge for everyone. Ooh, actually, hold on, let me read something here. I think the text message stuff might also be a safeguard against GDPR violations from the EU, if I'm correct. Maybe? But yeah, I'm not 100% what the legal details are. Thank you, Body Novel. Oh, thank you. Also, thank you for being here. I like your content. I almost put a Buluku request on your Dragon Ball job where pizza was throwing the pizza. I was like, I almost did it, but I was like, hey, got enough going on. They got enough going on. But I appreciate your content. Let me get back to this. So I am in favor of the code of conduct, right? There are some things that I feel better about now. I've gotten to speak to you, and I've kind of thought about it, and I've looked at Ultra David's Twitter and kind of gone through what the responses are, and like kind of put information together for myself. I hopefully people who watch the video will be able to come to their own conclusions. This will be up on YouTube right. Soonish, maybe. We'll see. Hopefully, if it doesn't require much editing. But yeah. I have one final question.
Okay.
That I kind of want to close out on. So there are definitely people just inherently who will want to hold on to this, right? Like obviously the signatories are going to take it to their own communities and propagate it there. How do you see the code of conduct being like adopted outside of the signatory communities, right? Like how does it grow beyond the people who are already involved?
So I think the way that it grows is that as this is gonna start, going out into these communities, I think a couple of things need to happen, and one of them I think is it's very obviously going to happen. Is that we'll take us for an example. We're going to take this back to our community. Much of what's in here is in line with our standards as laid out in our collegiate esports handbook anyway. So there's going to be a lot of overlap. For our players, it's going to be pretty easy to adopt. And I think that's going to be the case in most regions as well. Because most regions understand that to effectively grow you have to meet, these standards.
Right.
Otherwise, you're going to turn people away. Um, if there are people who are concerned about this being a power grab, and if there are TOs who look at this and think, oh, well, now all the decisions are being taken out of my hands, as they see that that is not the case, and as they see that, as you were talking about, implementing this is as simple as including a link to this and a tick box on your smash.gg page, that this isn't, going to be this, big invasive thing. And, furthermore, it is going to give you a support network in order to feel more confident in your ability to have a set standard of behavior and to have that, investigative backup if you need to in order to come to, conclusions about, corrective, measures and things like that. I think that that will naturally help it grow. And then my hope is that as people start to come forward, if there are violations, if we see, timely and measured decisions coming out from the investigative team, the investigative committee for this group, I think people will start to understand, that the intent of, this committee is, in the right place, because it is, signed up, right now it's people, again, largely in the Pacific Northwest, but, there are people, signatories, both governing and not, who are, dotted all over the U.S. People who just at the end of the day were very concerned by, the findings of, the past summer and everything like that, and want to make sure that everybody, and reaffirm that everybody's welcome here and everybody can be safe here. So
I have another question that I just realized as you made a point there, and I'm on the contact center part of the web page here. I'm gonna switch to the scene so that way. Oh God, I need to fix this thing. And I'm curious to know, how do people report to the governing body? It is not. I can't think of a place where it's listed in the document itself. And I'm looking at the contact center, and I'm wondering if it's possibly the public communications link. But what is the actual mechanism to reporting instances where the code of conduct is being broken?
that is a good question. I would assume that what they will do, if they haven't already, is on the FGCoC communications Twitter, just as there have been links to, their feedback page for the list of signatories for the document itself. They will make sure that that information is available, that there's a link. And if in doubt, again, I'm postulating here. If in doubt, I am certain that you could reach out to them via DM, email, and get that message out there, to the people who need to see it, which would be the investigative communities
Body
or
novel? Are you
committees.
on
Sorry.
this? Okay, hold on. I'm getting new information. We're still working on that. There's a link to the form under the feedback page. Okay, let's look. There's document feedback. Is there another just reporting feedback of just like, hey, at this event, such and such happened? Not the way to report. If you want to make a report, oh, use this form instead. Okay, okay. So let's just make that known for all the people out there that if you want to report an instance, you need to go to the document page and click this button. Hey, if you need a short link, I can do that real quick on Bitly. That's not a problem. Like, I can help out in that capacity. But you go to the conduct feedback form, and there is a second link on this page. It's right here. Go ahead and click it. It's long and ugly. We can make it short. I mean, if they want help with it, but
But yeah, I hope that answers that last question. And again, I would just like to reiterate, a final time that, my only role in this, officially, is as a signatory, and so as one of the representatives for Eastern Oregon's FGC, as part of EOU Esports. I've taken a look at this. I've decided that I really, really support this idea. I'd like the idea of a standardized set of standards, a uniform set of standards, that we all can agree, we should adhere to. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean everybody adheres to it overnight, but I think that it will definitely help scenes, especially ones that are new and upcoming. It's the idea where like us as a new esports program didn't really know how to go about making our own student player handbook, and what kind of um, culture we wanted to develop, what kind of standards we wanted to hold our players to. And we were fortunate, we reached out to Boise State esports, and we were able to use their code of conduct as a as a structure for that, and obviously made changes as needed to fit our program. But having that groundwork laid for you, especially if you're new to this, especially if you're new to TOing, if you're a new region and that infrastructure hasn't been laid out before you already, that can be super relieving. So but yeah, to reiterate, I'm just someone who signed on to it. I don't want to put words into the mouths of the people who've worked really hard on this for the past year. And my hope is that I have not misinterpreted any of their positions on these questions that you've asked. So, and if that's the case, then I would apologize to those those organizers. So just trying to help get the word out, and to express that I think this is going to be a good thing, and I'm very excited to see how they continue to hone it here in the coming weeks and months.
Well, hopefully if they feel like there's some stuff that needs to be addressed, they'd let me have the opportunity to interview them. Also, to piggyback on a statement you said earlier, and I want this to be absolutely clear before we end the interview, and then I probably end the stream after that. I want everyone to look at 1.5 very closely. Very closely. Because this is something that I saw a lot of people misinterpreting and not fully acknowledging. Is that this code of conduct will be considered the minimum standards for any community space. The backers, meaning the TOs in this case, may use additional third-party rules and may make their own decisions regarding behavior taking place in or targeting their community spaces if they want. So you can add, but you can't take away, is what I'm interpreting from this. But it still gives you, as the TO for your scene, the levity to make decisions that you need to make. Like if you have somebody who's like, hey, that conversation between those two made me uncomfortable. It's like, well, we have to understand that's their dynamic. Like, yeah, I see what that makes you uncomfortable. So I'll make sure that they know that that's not a dynamic you're comfortable with, or things like that. You know what I mean? It's a starting place. It's not the end all be all. This is not everyone must adhere to this all the time forever, and you can't make any changes to it. It's like, no, this is just the bare minimum of what you need, and then if you need more stuff, feel free to add it. At least that is what I have interpreted. Also, another thing that I saw this other YouTuber notoriously get wrong, or at least blatantly ignore, was that this applies to people in the events for events that have signed on to enforce it. And ultimately, it is up to the event and the TO to pick to use this rule set. That's all I got to say. So, thank you, Nilly Boy, for going on and coming onto the show and kind of helping us walk through this bit. I really appreciate Bodied Novel and Hagure being in the chat to kind of point out things that need to be pointed out. I appreciate you all being here, and I am looking forward to seeing how this goes. I think, again, this is going to be a great step for the community going forward. I'm so thankful that you've taken the time. Also, more cookies, you too. I saw your comments on Twitter earlier. God bless you. Yeah. I appreciate you guys taking the time, volunteering the time, which most people are definitely understating.
It's been amazing to sit in and over the past year to see the work that's gone into it. It's half a year plus it's closer to a year in the making, and so obviously a living document like this is going to change, and that's and that's fine, and that's the point. And so yeah, it's been super amazing to see a community come together and really set, a positive goal to reach for. So I'm very excited to see them continue with it.
So thank you very much, guys. Nils, I think that'll be it for next time. We'll get this up on YouTube so that way, you guys can share it around and feel like if there's any points that you feel like need to be addressed later, there's a conversational piece about it that can kind of fall back on. And I'm more than happy to do this show. When it comes to things that are important for the development of the community, I am more than happy to sit down and talk about it because conversation and discussion is the only way we're going to proper dialogue it's going to make the scene grow. So I am more than happy to do this, and I'm so thankful that you guys came out to watch.